I'm Amina, and I was only 10 when I first understood the weight of our fortune. We lived in a grand mansion in a Middle Eastern country I won't identify, where my family held authority through oil wealth and power. My father dressed in traditional robes, his beard silver and serious, while my mother glided like a ghost, her gaze always lowered. The atmosphere carried the scent of prayer incense 5 times daily, the calls resonating through our corridors. I possessed everything a child could want: silk gowns, treasures from distant lands, attendants ready to serve. Yet something felt fundamentally wrong. When I reached 12, I began witnessing things that broke my spirit. My uncles, wealthy men with luxury vehicles and expensive timepieces, would speak of being devout Muslims, yet I caught them secretly drinking and joking about their riches. The women in our household, including my aunts, remained silent, their voices consumed by traditions I couldn't grasp. One afternoon I watched my cousin's spouse weep after an argument, her face marked with bruises, and nobody intervened. When I questioned my mother about this, she silenced me, saying, "That's simply our way, Amina." I didn't protest, but internally I wondered where was the compassion they spoke of during prayers. The more I observed, the more I questioned everything. Gender restrictions separated us. Harsh consequences for minor errors frightened me, and the concept of relatives marrying each other turned my stomach. It seemed unnatural, like combining bloodlines that shouldn't merge. But I kept these thoughts buried inside. Speaking against it meant disgrace or exile, and I was too frightened to attempt it. Our estate resembled a gorgeous prison. The courtyards contained fountains and flowers, yet I couldn't roam freely. My father, a towering man with a commanding voice, instructed me in reading the Quran, his finger following the Arabic text. I absorbed the tales, prophets, conflicts, and regulations. But they didn't satisfy my curiosity. Why did my uncle strike his daughter for speaking back? Why did my cousin, a girl my own age, need to veil her face when males appeared? I recorded my thoughts in a small diary, concealing it beneath my pillow, my hands trembling. Each day the burden of being a royal daughter became heavier. I had to appear flawless, greet visitors with smiles, and never challenge anything. My dark eyes, large and inquisitive, began hiding my anxieties, and my long black hair, always pulled back, felt like shackles. One evening when I was 14, I sat beside a window watching the desert twilight. My cousin, my father's nephew, a young man with a cruel grin, passed by with his father, my uncle. They discussed me, their voices carrying. "She'll wed him someday," my uncle declared, gesturing toward my cousin. "It maintains the bloodline's purity." My heart dropped. The notion of marrying him, someone who shared my blood, disgusted me. I'd witnessed other family girls go through it. Quiet ceremonies, sorrowful expressions. I vowed to myself I'd never become like them, but I couldn't voice it. My father would consider it defiance, and my mother would weep, pleading with me to comply. So I remained quiet, my doubts expanding like a tempest within me. By 16, the pressure intensified. My father summoned me to his office, the space dim with thick drapes. "Amina," he said, his tone stern, "your cousin has requested your hand. It's time to consider marriage." He presented a photograph, my cousin, now 28, with a harsh face and emotionless eyes. "It's our tradition," he continued, "to preserve our family's strength." I felt my chest constrict. The idea of him touching me, of sharing a life with someone I feared, made me want to flee. I shook my head, my voice barely audible. "No, father, I cannot." His eyes grew cold, and he rose, looming over me. "You will understand," he threatened, and I realized my battle had just started. That evening, I sobbed into my pillow, my diary damp with tears, questioning if there existed a God who cared about my feelings. The mansion grew more frigid afterward. Servants murmured about my refusal, and my aunts regarded me with sympathy. My mother attempted to reason with me, her hands gentle on mine. "It's for the family, Amina," she said, her voice cracking. "You'll be protected." But protection didn't feel right. It felt like imprisonment. I began sneaking into the library, reading volumes my father had forbidden, stories from other countries, different faiths. One book mentioned a man who loved all people, not just his own, and it resonated with me. I didn't know his identity, but the concept felt warm, unlike the harsh rules I knew. My doubts intensified, but I concealed them, my olive skin pale with worry, my dark eyes seeking answers in the darkness. One night at 17, I overheard my uncle and father scheming. "She'll marry him next year," my uncle said, counting currency on a table. "The fortune remains ours." I pressed against the wall, my pulse racing. The contradiction stung, preaching faith while purchasing my future. I wanted to shout, but my voice stayed imprisoned. My cousin visited more frequently, his presence threatening, and I avoided him, my hands shaking as I wrote in my diary. Why must I marry my relative? I scrawled the words, a silent revolt. The mansion, despite its splendor, felt like a jail, and I knew I needed to find an escape, even if it meant sacrificing everything. That night, after my father's threat echoed in his study, I wept into my pillow, my diary soaked with tears, wondering if there was a God who understood my heart. The mansion felt colder than ever, the marble floors slippery under my bare feet as I crept back to my chamber. My olive skin, warm with hints of my Middle Eastern heritage, felt clammy, and my dark eyes burned from crying. My long black hair, still tied back, clung to my neck, and my hands, soft but shaking with faint marks from anxious scratching, gripped the diary tightly. I was 17, imprisoned in a life I rejected, and the thought of marrying my cousin made my stomach churn. His cruel smile haunted my thoughts, and I knew I had to resist, regardless of the pain. The following morning my father called me once more. His study reeked of old books and strong coffee, the curtains closed to block the desert sun. "Amina," he said, his voice like granite, "your cousin has proposed. The wedding will happen soon." He slid a picture across his desk, my cousin, now 28, with a hard jawline and cold stare, wearing a white robe. "It keeps our bloodline pure," he added, his tone final. I shook my head, my voice barely a whisper. "No, father, I can't marry him. It's wrong. Blood shouldn't mix that way." His expression darkened and he stood, towering above me. "You will learn obedience," he snapped, and I felt ice run through my veins. I rushed to my room, my heart pounding, tears streaming down my face. The punishment started that day. My father confined me to a small section of the mansion, a place without windows, just a bed and a Quran on a shelf. The walls were blank, the silence oppressive, and I could hear the servants' footsteps growing distant. My mother visited once, her eyes red. "It's for the family, Amina," she whispered, her hands trembling as she touched my cheek. "You'll be safe with him." But safety felt like deception, and her words shattered my heart. I sat on the bed, my hands tracing the marks, remembering how I'd scratched them raw while thinking about cousin marriages. It wasn't just the marriage, it was everything. The hypocrisy, the silence, the way my family twisted faith to benefit themselves. Days became weeks. My father brought my cousin to see me, his presence filling the room with tension. He smiled, but it didn't touch his eyes. "You'll be my bride," he said, his voice smooth yet menacing. I turned away, my stomach revolting. "I refuse," I said, my voice steady despite the terror. He laughed, and my father escorted him out, their voices angry outside. That evening a servant smuggled me food, her eyes compassionate. "Be cautious, Amina," she whispered, and I nodded, clinging to her words like salvation. The isolation exhausted me. I prayed in the Islamic manner, my lips moving, but my heart felt hollow. I missed the gardens, the sunlight, the freedom I'd never truly possessed. One afternoon my uncle visited, his gold timepiece gleaming as he sat across from me. "You disgrace us," he said, his voice low. "Marrying your cousin is our way. Wealth stays within the family." I looked at him, seeing the man who preached devotion but lived in luxury, and my anger ignited. "It's wrong," I said, my voice trembling. He struck me, the pain sharp on my cheek, and left without another word. I touched my face, tears falling, my doubts strengthening. My family's traditions felt like chains, and the idea of marrying my blood made me ill. I wrote in my diary, the words pouring out, "Why must I be sold to him? Where is the love?" The paper blurred as I cried, my hands shaking. The punishment worsened. My father ended my lessons, confiscating my books, leaving me with nothing but the Quran. I read it, searching for answers, but the rules about women and family bonds confused me further. I remembered my aunts married to their cousins, their lives empty and miserable, and I promised to escape that fate. One night I heard my cousin and father planning again. "She'll surrender," my cousin said, his voice icy. "If not, we'll compel her." I pressed my ear to the door, my heart racing. The servant, a woman named Layla, found me later, her face concerned. "I'll assist you," she whispered, and hope sparked inside me, though the fear remained overwhelming. Leaving meant losing everything, yet staying meant a life I couldn't endure. Weeks passed, and the isolation destroyed me. I sat on the floor, my olive skin pale from lack of sunlight, my dark eyes hollow with exhaustion. My hands, scarred and unsteady, held the diary, the pages filled with my anguish. I thought of my uncle's hypocrisy, preaching faith while hoarding wealth, and the silenced women, their voices stolen. The cousin marriage plan felt like the worst part, a tradition I couldn't accept. I prayed not to the God I'd known, but to someone new, someone who might hear my silent pleas. Layla slipped in again, her voice soft. "A journey is coming," she said. "We can attempt it." I nodded, my heart rising, knowing this might be my opportunity to break free from the chains of tradition. Layla's gentle whisper, "A journey is coming, we can attempt it," lingered in my mind as I sat on the cold floor of my mansion wing, my heart lifting with a spark of hope. The isolation had drained me, my olive skin, warm with hints of my Middle Eastern heritage, now pale and lifeless from weeks without sun. My dark eyes, sunken and weary, stared at the diary in my hands, the pages wrinkled from tears. My long black hair, tangled from neglect, fell over my face, and my slender frame felt fragile, my hands soft but marked with faint scars from nervous scratching, trembling as I held on to her promise. I was 19, trapped in a life of tradition I couldn't embrace, and the thought of marrying my cousin still made me nauseous. But Layla's words offered me a chance, and I grasped it desperately. The journey came a week later. My family planned a trip to Europe, a rare departure from the mansion, and I knew this was my moment. Layla, a quiet servant with gentle eyes, worked in the kitchens, her hands weathered from years of labor. She slipped into my room the night before, her voice hushed. "I've concealed clothes in the vehicle," she said, handing me a small bag. "When we stop, I'll help you escape." I nodded, my heart racing, my hands shaking as I packed my diary and a few treasures, a locket from my mother, a book I'd hidden. The plan was dangerous. My father's guards monitored everything, but I had to try. The idea of freedom, of escaping the cousin marriage I loathed, drove me forward. The journey began at sunrise. The mansion bustled with activity, servants loading luggage into sleek black vehicles. I wore a long robe, my face covered as tradition required, my dark eyes peering out, filled with fear and hope. My father sat in the lead car, his voice commanding, while I rode with my mother and Layla in the back. The desert stretched outside, sand glowing crimson under the rising sun, and I felt the weight of my family's expectations crushing down. My mother's hand rested on mine, her grip tight. "Be obedient, Amina," she said, her voice sorrowful. I wanted to tell her I couldn't, that marrying my blood felt wrong, but I stayed silent, my heart breaking. We stopped in a European city, Paris, I later discovered. After a long flight, the air felt different, cool and fresh, and I gazed at the tall buildings, my mind spinning. Layla signaled me during a rest stop, her eyes urgent. "Now," she whispered, and I slipped away with my bag, hidden under my robe. My legs trembled as I followed her through a crowd, my olive skin prickling with sweat, my dark eyes scanning for guards. We ducked into an alley, my breath coming rapidly, and she handed me a jacket. "Go to the church on Rue de la Paix," she said. "They'll help." I embraced her, tears in my eyes, and ran, my slender frame blending into the strangers around me. The church was small, its doors creaking as I entered. The air smelled of aged wood and candles, and I collapsed onto a pew, my hands trembling, the scars catching the light. I was alone, lost, without money or documents. My family's power was distant, but still a threat. A woman in a simple dress approached, her smile warm. "I'm Marie," she said in broken Arabic. "You're safe here." I wept, my voice breaking, telling her I'd fled from a forced marriage, from a life I couldn't live. She nodded, her eyes kind, and brought me to a refugee center run by Christians. I didn't know what to think, my doubts about Islam, my fear of my cousin, all tangled together. At the center, I slept on a thin mattress, my body aching from the journey. The people there were different. Men and women worked together, their voices gentle. A man named Paul, with silver hair and a soft voice, sat with me one day. "Have you heard of Jesus?" he asked, holding a book, the Bible. I shook my head, my dark eyes wide. But he read about a man who loved everyone, who forgave. It felt strange, so unlike the rules I'd known, and my heart stirred. I thought of my uncle's hypocrisy, the silenced women, the cousin marriage I'd fled, and a tiny hope grew. But I was frightened. My family could find me, and my old beliefs held me back. Weeks passed, and I remained hidden. The center provided food and shelter, but I felt lost. My olive skin grew paler, my dark eyes shadowed with worry, and my hands, scarred and shaky, wrote in my diary. "Is this God?" I scribbled, questioning everything. Paul invited me to a secret gathering, a church in a basement, and I went, my heart pounding. The chamber was shadowy, crowded with hushed individuals, and they performed melodies unfamiliar to me. A lady shared her story of abandoning her history, her tone cracking, and I experienced her anguish. My disbelief battled with this fresh sensation, my thoughts divided between the Islam I questioned and the compassion I witnessed. I departed that evening, my thin body burdened, pondering whether I could ever fit in. One night, as twilight descended upon Paris, I positioned myself near a window at the facility, my journal open. My cousin's expression tormented me, his icy grin, his warnings, and I trembled. The notion of wedding him, of existing with my relative in such manner, continued to disgust me. Paul positioned himself next to me, his tone caring. "You needn't bear that burden solo," he stated, revealing a passage about liberation. I wept, my tears dropping onto the paper, my fingers gripping the volume. My belief fluctuated, my uncertainties profound, but something drew me toward this fresh direction. I hadn't realized it then, but that attraction would transform everything. I exited that underground sanctuary in Paris, my thin body weighted with contemplations, questioning whether I could ever belong, my pulse quickening from the melodies I didn't recognize. The crisp evening breeze touched my pale complexion, skin heated with traces of my Middle Eastern heritage, and my brown eyes, darkened with concern, gazed at the stone pathway. My lengthy black hair, still disheveled from my flight, swept my face, and my palms, gentle yet marked with subtle wounds from anxious clawing, held my journal firmly. I was 20, isolated in a metropolis I couldn't comprehend, my former existence of royal restrictions diminishing, but my doubts remaining loud. The concept of marrying my cousin, of coexisting with my blood in a manner that seemed incorrect, plagued me, and the fresh words about Jesus awakened something profound within. At the refugee facility, I couldn't rest. The narrow mattress irritated my spine, and I remained there, my mind spinning. Paul, the silver-haired gentleman with a gentle tone, had provided me a Bible, its sheets delicate and weathered. I accessed it beneath the faint illumination, my palms quivering as I read about a person who dined with outsiders, who pardoned rather than penalized. It differed so greatly from the regulations I'd understood, the falseness of my uncles, the muted women, the cousin unions I'd escaped. I documented in my journal, "Is this affection genuine?" My tears blurring the ink, my disbelief fought fiercely. Islam had been my universe, but it never satisfied my soul. This Jesus seemed like a murmur, and I desired to hear more. Days transformed into weeks, and I devoted every available moment with that Bible. I'd position myself by a tiny window, my pale complexion becoming paler, my brown eyes examining the pages. One verse declared, "Approach me, all you who are exhausted," and I sensed it, my weariness from the palace, from my father's rage, from the terror of my cousin. I considered him, his cold gaze promising an existence I couldn't endure, and my stomach churned. Paul observed my curiosity and invited me to additional gatherings. I attended, my pulse racing each occasion, my thin body entering the basement where people prayed and performed. A woman called Fatima with a mark on her face revealed how she'd abandoned her violent spouse, her tone breaking. I wept with her, sensing her pain, my own remorse emerging. One evening following a gathering, I remained late. Paul sat with me, his tone gentle. "Amina, you needn't carry your history alone," he said, showing me a tale of Jesus perishing for everyone. I experienced a warmth like illumination penetrating, and my tears descended. "I desire this," I whispered, my voice unsteady. He described baptism, a step into a fresh existence, and I consented, my pulse racing with terror and hope. The following day, in a concealed room, a minister poured water over my head, declaring, "You are a fresh creation." I felt pure, my pale complexion tingling, my brown eyes moist with joy. But the joy was brief. My family discovered. A week later, a message arrived, slipped beneath my door. It was from a spy my father had dispatched, his words harsh. "You disgrace us. Return or we'll locate you." My palms shook, the scars catching the light, and I understood the peril. Apostasy was a violation where I originated, punishable by execution, and my cousin's warnings echoed in my thoughts. I panicked, my thin body pacing the chamber, my lengthy black hair falling into my face. Paul assisted me in changing my name to Sarah, provided me fresh documents, and relocated me to a safer residence. I existed in shadows, my heart divided, thankful for this tranquility, but terrified of what might come. The terror increased. One evening I heard footfalls outside, my brown eyes wide with horror. A man's silhouette passed the window, and I concealed myself, my palms gripping my journal, the pages filled with prayers to this fresh God. It was a false warning, but it left me disturbed. I thought of my mother's sorrowful face, my father's anger, and the cousin marriage I'd escaped. My remorse weighed heavily, abandoning my family, questioning my belief. But the whisper of grace sustained me. I wrote, "Jesus, if you're real, shield me." My tears falling, my faith delicate but developing. Months elapsed, and I began sharing my tale with a small group at the safe residence. My pale complexion was marked with stress, my brown eyes reflecting pain, and my palms, scarred and shaky, held the Bible as I spoke. I told them about the palace, the falseness, the forced marriage I'd refused. They listened, their eyes kind, and I felt less isolated. But the past wasn't gone. One night a call came, my uncle's voice cold and furious, threatening to drag me back. I dropped the phone, my thin body collapsing, my lengthy black hair covering my face as I cried. My faith wavered, my remorse deep, but I prayed, clinging to the hope that had brought me this far. I dropped the phone, my thin body collapsing to the floor of the safe residence in Paris, my lengthy black hair falling over my face. And as my uncle's furious voice faded into silence, my pale complexion, heated with traces of my Middle Eastern heritage, felt cold with perspiration, and my brown eyes, wide with terror, stared at the wall. My palms, gentle but marked with faint scars from nervous clawing, trembled as I clutched my journal, the pages damp with tears. I was 22, hiding under the name Sarah, my fresh faith in Jesus a fragile shield against the past, the threat to drag me back. The memory of my cousin's cold smile and the cousin marriage I'd escaped weighed on me like stones. My heart ached with guilt for leaving my family, but the whisper of grace kept me going. The safe residence was small, a cramped chamber with a single bed and a flickering lamp. I spent my days there, my pale complexion growing paler from stress, my brown eyes shadowed with pain. I spoke at churches, my voice shaky as I told my story, the palace's falseness, the forced marriage, the doubts that led me here. People listened, their faces kind, but I felt exposed. One evening a woman named Claire with gentle hands sat with me. "You're courageous, Sarah," she said, her voice soft. I nodded, but inside I wondered if I was. Nightmares haunted me, my cousin's threats, my father's anger, and I woke up crying, my thin body shaking, my lengthy black hair sticking to my face. The danger came closer. One afternoon I heard a knock, and my heart stopped. A man's voice asked for Amina, and I hid under the bed, my palms clutching the Bible Paul had given me. It was a neighbor, not a spy, but the fear stayed. Claire moved me to a fresh place, a tiny flat with barred windows, and I existed in shadows, my brown eyes always watching. I started an anonymous blog, typing my story with shaky fingers, my scarred palms pausing over the keys. I ran from a cage of tradition, I wrote, and found a God who loves me. It reached others, but I worried. Could my family trace it? The guilt grew, my old existence pulling at me, making me question if I'd done right. Months passed and I joined a women's group, my voice growing stronger as I spoke of freedom. But the past wasn't done with me. One night a car slowed outside, its lights flashing through the bars. I froze, my thin body pressed against the wall, my lengthy black hair hiding my face. Footsteps approached and I prayed, my palms trembling. "Jesus, protect me." It was a false alarm, a delivery man, but it left me shaken. I thought of my mother's sad eyes, my father's stern face, and the cousin marriage I'd refused. My remorse was heavy, leaving them, questioning my faith, but I held on to the hope I'd found. The pressure built, my anonymous blog grew, messages from silent doubters filling my inbox, and I felt a purpose. But Pastor David warned me. "Your family won't stop," he said, his voice grave. "We need to move you." I nodded, my brown eyes wet, knowing he was right. The next week we planned to move to London, a safer place with a bigger Christian community. The night before I packed my bag, my palms shaking as I tucked in my journal and Bible. My pale complexion was marked with worry lines, my thin body weary, and I cried, thinking of the existence I'd lost and the one I was building. The journey to London was quiet, my pulse pounding as the aircraft lifted off. I arrived in a gray metropolis, my brown eyes taking in the rain-soaked streets, my lengthy black hair damp under a hood. A fresh, safe residence waited, and I settled in, my palms tracing the scars, my thoughts full of doubts. I spoke at a church there, my voice breaking as I shared my escape, the punishment, the conversion. People cried with me, their palms warm on mine, and I felt less alone. But the nightmares returned. My cousin's face, my uncle's slap, and I woke, my thin body curled up, my brown eyes staring into the darkness. One Sunday, a letter came, its handwriting familiar. It was from my mother, slipped through a contact. "We miss you," it said. "Come home." My palms shook, the scars tingling, and I cried, torn between love and fear. I wrote back anonymously, begging her to understand, my tears falling on the paper, my faith wavered. Did I betray them? But David sat with me, his voice steady. "God sees your heart," he said, showing me a verse about peace. I clung to it, my remorse deep but my hope stronger. Knowing London might be where I'd find my voice, I clung to the verse about peace that David showed me. My thin body curled up in the fresh, safe residence in London, my lengthy black hair, damp from the rain outside, my pale complexion heated with traces of my Middle Eastern heritage, was marked with worry lines, and my brown eyes, still wet from tears over my mother's letter, stared into the gray light filtering through the window. My palms, gentle but scarred from nervous clawing, held the paper tight, the words "We miss you" come home burning into my heart. I was 24, my fresh existence in London delicate but growing, my faith in Jesus a lifeline amid the remorse that haunted me. The move from Paris had saved me, but the past, my cousin's threats, my family's rejection, still pulled at me. The safe residence was small, a cozy flat with a view of wet streets, and I settled into a routine. My pale complexion began to regain some color, my brown eyes softening as I found purpose. I joined a ministry for ex-Muslim women, my voice shaky at first as I shared my story. The palace's falseness, the forced cousin marriage I'd fled, the doubts that led me to Christ. The women listened, their faces reflecting my pain, and I felt a connection. One day, a girl named Huda with a bruised cheek sat beside me. "I ran too," she whispered, and we cried together, my palms scarred and warm, holding hers. It was the start of something big. Months passed and my anonymous blog grew. I wrote under a code name, my fingers trembling over the keys, sharing my escape and faith. Messages poured in, women from my homeland silent like I'd been, asking for hope. "You're not alone," I typed back, my brown eyes wet, my thin body leaning into the work. But the past wasn't gone. One night a dream woke me, my cousin's face, his cold voice promising to find me, and I sat up, my lengthy black hair sticking to my neck and my pulse racing. I prayed, my palms clutching the Bible, and felt a peace settle, my remorse fading. Early this year, I stood before a church in London, my pale complexion glowing with a quiet strength, my brown eyes steady despite the pain. I told my story, how I'd questioned Islam, refused my cousin, endured punishment, and found Jesus. The room was full, people crying as I spoke of the falseness I'd seen, the women silenced, the blood ties I couldn't accept. "I thought God didn't care," I said, my voice breaking, but he did. A man in the back nodded, his eyes kind, and I knew my words reached him. After, women hugged me, their palms warm, and I felt like I belonged. The ministry grew, a small group meeting in a community center. I taught them about forgiveness, my own heart wrestling with it. One day I wrote to my mother again, anonymously, saying, "I forgive you." My palms shook, the scars tingling, but I meant it. Her reply came weeks later, a short note, "I pray for you." It wasn't much, but it healed a part of me. I thought of my father, his stern face, and my cousin, his threats, and let the anger go, my brown eyes closing in prayer, my remorse leaving them, questioning. My path turned to peace, a gift I hadn't expected. One evening as dusk fell over London, I walked with Huda, her arm in mine, my thin body stronger now. The metropolis lights reflected in my brown eyes, and I felt free. We met homeless women near a park, their faces weary, and I shared my story again. "I was trapped," I said, my voice soft, "but God set me free." They listened, some crying, and I handed out blankets, my scarred palms steady. A young girl hugged me, her tears on my shoulder, and I knew this was my calling. My past, the palace, the chains, the cousin marriage I'd escaped had shaped me for this. Back at the safe residence, I sat by the window, my lengthy black hair loose, my pale complexion warm in the lamplight. My palms traced the scars, no longer ashamed, and I wrote in my journal, "God turned my silence into a voice." The anonymous blog pinged with a fresh message, a woman planning to flee, and I replied, my heart full. I thought of my journey from the gilded cage to this moment and believed God had a plan for every silent heart. The rain tapped the glass, a gentle rhythm, and I smiled, my brown eyes bright with hope, knowing redemption was mine to share.